Introducing Chris Floyd. He's the author of Empire Burlesque, High Crimes and Low Comedy in the Bush Imperium, and the blog of the same name, available at chris-floyd.com. One of my favorite bloggers and writers. Welcome back to the show, Chris.
Hi, glad to be here.
Good to talk to you again. And I was very interested in your article that you wrote about Admiral Fox Fallon on, I guess, right before he got fired, but
right.
Based on this new article in Esquire magazine. And your point was, I think it was, you titled your latest entry, War Crimes Accomplice Canned for Insufficient Groveling. This is no hero of the anti-war movement, but an administrator of American empire who got just a little bit out of line.
Yeah, well, that's been my basic take. That was my take from reading the Esquire story, which was, as you know, it had a lot of interesting information in it, but it was written in a complete hagiography, life of the saint sort of thing. Well, yes, the idea that Fallon was some sort of hero, I thought what's been remarkable was that this has come even from some very strongly anti-war voices. Some of the same people who've been so rightly vociferous in their denunciation of Iraq as a clear war crime, what's going on in Iraq as a war crime, have been some of the ones depicting Fallon as a hero and lamenting his fall. But, Fallon has been the man in charge of this war crime for more than a year. He's the commander of, he's the leader of U.S. Central Command. He's directing the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Somalia. And in all these places, thousands of innocent people have died, and hundreds of thousands have been displaced from their homes, vast human suffering, all under Fallon's command for the last year. And so now, aside from the point of that perhaps he was opposed to the timing, whatever, of an attack on Iran, this seems to have gotten lost in the shuffle. It was lost before his resignation, and I think it's being lost a little bit after his resignation.
Yeah, well, and I think, some of us who've discussed, Fallon's been a topic in interviews that I've done with Gareth Porter over the last year, for example. And I think you're right that sometimes, even though I'm sure Gareth Porter and I recognize that, any head of CENTCOM who's in charge of this thing certainly has all his own problems, as you mentioned, but we sort of get caught up in the relativity of the situation and think, well, at least he's making life difficult for Dick Cheney, and so in that sense, he's, more of an ally than
absolutely.
Stephen Hadley.
I see the point. What's happened, of course, in our government is we've all been turned into criminologists. We all, the guys that used to sit around and try to figure out what was going on behind the scenes in the Kremlin, where the Soviet leaders were standing on the Presidium and where they were standing over Lenin's tomb. We all have to try to read these tea leaves, and we all, and it's not unimportant. We have to try to figure out what's going on. Mm-hmm. But as I said in my story the other day, before Fallon was fired, Fallon was appointed by Bush, and as we've seen, he served Bush, very well, and he served as long as Bush found him useful. And as soon as Bush didn't find him useful, found him a pain in one way or the other, either because he was, getting too big for his britches and talking out of turn, or because they just want to get him out of the way for this attack on Iran. Whatever the point I made the other day was that, in one sense, Fallon doesn't matter. He didn't. It was good. Anything that tweaked Bush's nose a little bit, or was seen in the press to tweak his nose, that was fine. But it's just obvious that when they wanted Fallon out of the way, he'd be out of the way. He was just sort of there on sufferance. They were doing other things, and that's what's happened. That's what's happened. I guess I don't know. I think I put it the other day. I can't remember now exactly how I put it, but the point was being that if Bush wants to invade Iran, he's going to invade Iran. It didn't matter if Fallon was there or not. If Fallon wouldn't do it for some reason, and I made the point also that one thing that came out in this Esquire article was that yes, Fallon had some disagreements with the Bush administration, but these disagreements seem to be entirely to do with timing and tactics of an attack on Iran. Now, there's this one quote in the story which I thought was most telling when, Fallon is talking to Thomas Barnett, who wrote the article. He's talking to Barnett about, we have a lot of pots boiling over in the region right now. We have to keep careful not to have too many pots boiling over. And, it's obvious that he doesn't want to go leaping into a war with Iran right now because he's got so much on his plate. He's conducting a war of aggression in Iraq. He's conducting a war in Afghanistan. He's helping the Ethiopians kill civilians in Somalia. He's got a lot on his plate. He's a busy man.
Right.
But finally, Barnett keeps pushing him and keeps pushing him. He says, well, what if it comes to war with Iran? And then Fallon just says, This is a direct quote from Barnett's article. Get serious. These guys are ants. When the time comes, you crush them. Okay, so this is the man we're told was standing in between us and war with Iran, is a guy who says, when the time comes, we crush these ants, we crush these insects. Well, I mean, this is not to make too much out of one remark, but this is, to me, very indicative of the mindset that someone like Fallon had, and the mindset you have to serve a regime like this. As I think I mentioned in one of my stories on Fallon was that if Fallon would have been a hero if he had resigned when the United States invaded Iraq, you say, for example, to say, listen, this is a dishonorable action, I can't be associated with it. Now then he would be a hero. But waiting around and then suddenly being fired and pretending like it's resigned right now, which could be just weeks before we strike Iran. I mean, he's not, and having served as a year to prosecute this war in Iraq and stuff. I mean, he's not a hero. He's just an imperial servant. He got out of line. They got him out of the way. He's gone. So this is how important he was. This was what a bulwark he was. He just, as soon as they got tired of him, they got rid of him, and that was always going to be the case. It was always going to be the case. He wouldn't be in there if he was someone they couldn't get rid of. They wouldn't have put him in there if there's not somebody. There's no. He's not. It's not like when they get rid of Fallon, the whole people will take the streets or something like that. You wouldn't be in that position if you can't be gotten rid of that way. So, not that they would even appointed him in the first place, if they didn't think he was going to do the main thing. As he said in his resignation, Fallon said, well, I don't have any disagreement with the strategic objectives of the administration. And what are the strategic objectives of the administration? Well, they're simply to impose American dominance on the Central Command area. That was his area, right? All across the oil-bearing regions and things like that. So,
and throughout the administration,
that's basically my take on it. Yeah.
Throughout the administration, they fired all kinds of generals and replaced them, and at the same time, George Bush insists that he's a commander guy, which I guess serves two purposes. One, he's attempting to distance himself from the political liabilities of running the war from Washington, D.C., as Lyndon Johnson did, which, of course, is the only reason America lost the Vietnam War. But also it means that the buck stops across the river at the Pentagon, not at the White House. Yeah.
Well, obviously, I mean, yes. I mean, as I said before, this whole thing comes down to the whole responsibility is actually Bush's. And no, I do agree with the people who said that since Fallon has resigned or been kicked out. I mean, that is an important thing that's happened. I mean, I think it does indicate that that they're limbering up for an attack on Iran. More than likely, that's what they're trying to do. And it was obvious from the article that he disagreed, as I said, with the timing of it and with the presentation of it. And rightly so, of course. I mean, anyone with any sense who, was in that position would say, look, we're too stretched too far. We can't do this. This is stupid. And also he had some questions about going on and on in Iraq in the same way. But,
well, and something else, Chris, in that article is that all his dissent over the last year in the Financial Times, and apparently talked to Hosni Mubarak and ruled out the all options on the table thing, he defended that by saying he wasn't trying to undercut the administration. He was just trying to settle down our Sunni Arab allied dictatorships in the region to let them know that we're just, right now at least, we're just trying to scare the hell out of the Iranians. We're not really going to do it, so relax.
No, absolutely. I thought that was a remarkable bit of the that's come out since then was his reasoning. Well, I'm trying to chill out our dictators. It wasn't anything. Of course, it's all just smoke and mirrors one way or the other. Again, it comes down to the White House, and it comes down to this is the system we have now. When the president decides to launch a war, then that's what's going to happen, and no one's going to stop it. No one's going to stop it.
Yeah. Chalmers Johnson in Sorrows of Empire points out about how the Pentagon has basically replaced the State Department. And, as you say, all this does come down to the president, the vice president, what they want. But how they go about dealing with the world is, a big part of, revealing what it is that they want. And basically, the State Department doesn't really count anymore. Generals come in, and they're the real ambassadors. They're the ones who come ashore from their giant battleships and tell the dictators what to do and what to think.
I mean, this is what I mentioned in my first article about Fallon. This is what came out most clearly from the Esquire piece. This is what I got from it mostly. Was not that, Fallon was a bulwark against war, but was that what it showed unwittingly was that it showed our imperial system in action, and that was that we have these generals, we have these, these far-flung commands, which are just like these guys are just like the Roman Empire's proconsuls who used to go out and they command a certain region, and they, there was no difference between what Fallon was doing and what these proconsuls did for the Roman emperors. They went out, they dictated the foreign policy of the other places, they dictated their economic interests, they dictated who was there, who was in power and who was not. But, just like it came out in the story, and just like the Roman emperors, they didn't just snap their fingers and everything fall into place. They had to cajole someone. They had to, mollify this dictator and maybe make some compromises and maybe have some setbacks. But as I said the other day, and this is what you said, this is why these generals are taking over. Because behind everything that they do lurks the threat of Roman military power and the promise that these places, would be destroyed if Rome's interests were not accommodated in the end. And that's exactly what Fallon's doing. That's what his replacement will do. That's what all these guys do. And you're right. I mean, the State Department has simply disappeared. It's just, I don't even know what they do. I guess they handle some PR every now and then.
Yeah. Which
is really remarkable because as you know, I'm sure in the early days of the American Republic, the State Department was one of the most powerful offices. And the Secretary of State was considered almost the Prime Minister of the United States. It was considered a very important role. And now it's just, as you say, they're just errand boys or whatever for the president. They just snap their finger and say, do this and do that. So.
Right. Well, they've been reduced to, as you say, public relations. Their job is to teach the people of the world who apparently just can't seem to understand that we only mean the best for them.
Well, I think in all these things, I think by now, even the people in Washington realize that all this stuff the State Department is doing and all these PR things they do are actually aimed more at the American people than the people overseas.
Right.
I mean, the Egyptian people who were on the spear point of Hosni Mubarak's dictatorship, they know what's being done to them. The Syrian people know what's going on. The Iraqi people know what's being done to them. The Iranian people know what the effect of these sanctions. These people know what's actually being done to them. I think more and more of this propaganda, these trips, Condi Rice goes over to, the Palestinians know what's being done to them. When she goes over and, we do all these sort of, a lap around the Middle East talking about peace or something. I think that's aimed almost totally now at the American market, Because like one of the few populations in the world who the majority of people don't know what's going on in the world are the Americans. And so this is, it's all sort of aimed at keeping them that way.
Right, yeah, I've heard foreigners say that they're just astounded sometimes when they watch American TV and realize, oh my God, this is what the American people think? Well, no wonder then.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it happens to me every time I go back to the United States. As you know, I'm living in England now.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever I go back, I went back over Christmas for actually the longest stay I've been for quite a while. And when I first go back and I look at the news, I mean, I remember looking at the news, and I came in on the airport, and I came into Chicago airport. We were transferring, and I had to watch, there's the CNN news, which you are forced to watch in every airport because you can't get away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some big report on the election. It was the Iowa caucus or something. And I just couldn't believe these people. I said, who are these people? And these talking heads, they were jabbering about absolute nonsense, and the candidates would come on, and they would do these little, it was like, I don't know, I felt like I was sort of in an insane asylum or something.
Well, what's really funny is the CNN that they have at all the airports is that's the good CNN.
Oh,
I was just going to say, there was, I forget if it was when Bhutto was killed in Pakistan or one of these imperial misadventures had gone, and for some reason the guys in Atlanta just couldn't get their act together in time, so they switched over and they actually let Austin, Texas watch CNN International for a while. And the lady behind the counter, she was pretty and blonde, but you could tell that she actually, knew something about what was going on and was able to ask questions and stuff. It was incredible. I was astounded at the quality of CNN International compared to what I usually get on channel 46 or whatever around here.
Well, no, CNN International is much better than CNN, but either way, you're talking at a very low level.
Very low.
But yes, when I came in, I just couldn't believe, day after day I'd watch the news and read the newspapers. I couldn't believe the kind of information the American people were getting and the narrowness of the information, the narrowness of the viewpoint. This is a cliche for people who know about these things, but the extremely narrow range of opinion from far right to center right. This is the only thing that ever appears on American television or in the news, basically. So, it was quite a revelation.
Well, you brought up Admiral Fallon's characterization of the population of Persia as ants.
Mm-hmm.
I guess then you disagree with that. You see those people as people, even if there's, a lot of distance and salt water between here and there?
Oh, they're so far away. I guess they look like ants. Maybe that's true. I don't know. But no, of course not. I mean, this is the whole thing. I mean, of course they're human beings. This is, I mean, again, this is an old game. Anyone that we're opposed to, they lose their humanity. Absolutely. I think Jonathan Swartz writes about Jonathan Swartz. It's a tiny revolution.
Mm-hmm.
He writes about this a lot too. How fortunate America is that all their enemies are subhumans and people who like to die. Because he goes back and he finds all these old quotes where back in Vietnam they say, oh well, your Vietnamese has a different idea of life and death than we do, and you can find that all the way back. The Indians, well, they don't treasure life as we do, so it's okay to kill them, by the bucketful.
Yeah, and the dastardly Huns too.
They're never as human as we are, so that's all. We're always fortunate that's true.
Yeah, well, it's funny because the Germans now, who are our close allies and are considered Western Europeans and just like us and mostly Christian and all that kind of thing. Well, why they were the evil Huns and always have been back just a couple of generations ago.
Well, of course, I know that's true. I mean, but what's the Bob Dylan line? But the Germans now too have God on their side,
Yeah. What's funny though? You, as far as I can tell, are the only Western journalist who cares about what's happening in Somalia at all, or bothers to investigate at least that I can find anywhere. And something that really brought the individual humanity of the Somalis to my attention last week when the first, actually I believe there were two, but in the first missile strike, a Tomahawk missile was fired from a Navy ship at a house in Somalia and killed 6 people, 3 women and 3 children, and missed the so-called Al-Qaeda terrorist who was the target. And it sort of seems like, if you launch a war and you send the Ethiopian army in and you push everybody out of Mogadishu and you have these big battles and lots of people die. Well, it's lots of people die, like Stalin said, it becomes a statistic. But when it's just 6 people, just 6 women and 6 children, why, those are individuals, really, even if they're in Somalia. It's kind of inescapable in that sense, when it's a smaller number of casualties like that.
No, of course. I think that does come across that way. And, of course, it's true. I mean, there's 6 people in a house, just like the people living next door to you. And, no, this thing is Somalia. I mean, there are a few people writing on it. And, of course, there are a lot of African journalists writing on it, which is and a lot of good African English language sites of African journalists. I mean, that's where you can find out a lot of information about that. But, yes, this thing in Somalia, as we're talking about Admiral Fallon, this is also his ballpark. And those missiles were sent at his command, ultimately. This was sent under his command. Those missiles that killed those 3 women and those 3 children for no good, godly reason on earth were sent, of course, not as a direct order of Admiral Fallon, because he was out swanning around with Hosni Mubarak somewhere, sipping martinis. But he has the ultimate responsibility for that. And so that's when we go around, we're talking about this great hero who's going to save us from war. Well, what war is he saving us from? He just murdered 3 women and 3 children last week who were just sitting in their house. And this thing, the whole point about the Somalia regime change war that the United States green-lighted and it has helped every step of the way is it's an unbelievably important story, and it's a horrible story, and it's an atrocious story, and it's completely ignored, as you said, and it sort of gets, sort of drives me crazy because people just don't care. I write about it, and sometimes I write about it, and my traffic goes down. People just don't care, and But it's the UN now says, the Red Cross, the Red Cross says that the humanitarian crisis in Somalia is worse than the one in Darfur,
Right, hundreds of thousands of refugees.
George Clooney's not there, and Angelina Jolie's not there because nobody cares about it, and it's just not, it's not sexy or whatever. And but it's just it's a horror story. It's a true horror story, and it goes on and on and on, and it's much worse now than it was last year. And as you say, we launched these missile sites, these missile attacks, and there's no reaction. There might be a story on page 17 of the New York Times, an AP story, saying, "Oh, a missile attack was launched, and they missed the Al Qaeda guy," and that's it. Just like, well, that's just normal. It's just that's just life as life goes on. And I think it's just one of the things that. It's just maddening, actually. It's just maddening. This can go on, and no one cares. And where's Obama? Where's Hillary? No one talks about it. No one says anything about it. But it just goes on.
Well, and if you pointed out to them that Somalia is a worse humanitarian crisis than in Sudan, the Democrats would just say, well, we ought to invade that place then.
Yeah.
Send some peacekeepers to go straighten things out.
Well, yes, of course. Both Obama and Hillary are surrounded by these, what are they called, liberal interventionists. You have Samantha Power, and of course she's gone, supposedly now, and who Hillary has, she has this, isn't O'Hanlon with Hillary and all these people. Yeah, of course that's what they believe in. But it's just it's a horrible situation, as you say, and somehow I think, as you're right, because it's more on a smaller scale, it somehow brings home the humanity of it more, or the inhumanity of it more.
Yeah, another thing that has to be mentioned in talking about the regime change in Somalia is that, according to the Washington Post, anyway, I guess I don't really have any way to verify this, but according to the Washington Post, the literal official excuse, the so-called casus belli for this American regime change in Somalia is that 3 Al-Qaeda operatives were suspected to be there, including 2 suspects wanted, and this is in the official quotes, wanted for questioning by the FBI in relation to the Africa Embassy bombings of 1998.
No,
3!
Yeah, yes, I know. I've been writing about this for almost, what is it now, a year and a half now since we invaded, helped the Ethiopians invade in late December 2006 it was.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. This was the cause given at the time. 3, they're looking for 3 guys. And so they roped in the army of this brutal, torturing dictatorship in Ethiopia to invade this already shattered nation, which had come to some measure of stability for the first time in 15 years.
Yes.
I mean, not a paradise on earth. I wouldn't want to have lived under the Islamic court system and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, I mean that's up to the Somalis to decide, isn't it? But anyway,
right.
they had the first bit of stability. So they shattered all that. They came in there, and yes, their excuse was that the 3 guys who may have been tied to Al-Qaeda. I mean, this is ridiculous. I mean, it's ridiculous on its face. I mean, if this is to hunt down 3 guys is a law enforcement operation. You don't invade a nation and destroy it to find 3 guys. Of course, we did that already, right? We invaded Panama to get 1 guy, Noriega, who's still sitting in our prison somewhere. So,
yep, killed thousands that day.
Yeah. I mean, thousands of people died, and we had to get that 1 guy. But yeah, of course, this is it's just what is What's so maddening is not that governments would put out these sort of bald-faced lies and these ludicrous things. What else are they going to do? What else are they going to go and tell the truth? But it's that our press just swallows it all. They just swallow it all, and no one says, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. I mean, where's the tough questions? Every time Bush appears somewhere, someone should have asked him, what are you talking about? You invaded the whole country for 3 people? What are you talking about? But
yeah, he probably doesn't even know about it. Somalia, where's that?
Yeah. We had the press yucking it up with him at these press dinners, and they all joke around. They put on their little funny hats, and here the president comes out and he sings a funny song, and I don't understand. I mean, how could you even be in the same room with Bush? If Bush came into a room and some function I was in, I'd have to get up and leave. I just have to get up and leave. You couldn't countenance the presence of this war criminal with your applause and your laughter and things like this. It's just.
Yeah, well, I just saw the YouTube of him at the gridiron dinner or whatever they call it with all the media sycophants. Oh, it was horrifying.
Yeah, I know it's a freak show. I mean, but this is what guides the discourse and guides the policy and guides the debate of the most powerful nation in the history of the world. It's just a little bit scary when you think about it.
Yeah, something that you wrote that was so interesting on your blog. It's chris-floyd.com, Empire Burlesque, and you talk about this book about the fall of the Roman Empire that you've been reading, and how the Christian scholars had to come up with a way to explain why it wasn't Christianity's fault that Rome had fallen. And in doing so, they discovered this brilliant truth that ought to be obvious to anyone, that Rome was actually just another state, not blessed by Zeus or by Jesus Christ. It was just a bunch of humans going around killing people just like all other governments in the world.
No, absolutely. That was, this is the book by Peter Heather, who's a professor over here at Oxford, called The Fall of the Roman Empire. And you look at the fall of, and this is talking about how, this was St. Augustine who was coming up with it to try to account for how Rome had been sacked by the Goths and stuff like that. And he had a great quote that that the whole empire was built on nothing more than the desire to dominate. And this was St. Augustine's quote was, "This lust for domination brings great evils to vex and exhaust the whole human race. And Rome was conquered by this lust when she first triumphed over Alba, which was the first little country city-state that they conquered, And to the popular claim of her crime, she gave the name of glory. St. Augustine was saying that Rome went off the rails, the Roman Republic went off the rails when it got this urge to dominate. And with their first great military triumph, their first imperial triumph, led them into evil. And like I said, it was a great insight that he had. And he also had the insight that, Rome could fall. It's been around for 1,000 years at this point, but, it could fall tomorrow. And I think these are insights, as I say, there's no hard and fast equation, that history doesn't repeat itself exactly.
Right.
But you can certainly draw lessons from it, and this is the kind of thing I think that we, as I said,
yeah, it's much more like farce this time around, I'd say.
Yeah, it's like a speeded up farce, like an old-fashioned Keystone Cops thing,
right. But, with the Benny Hill music playing in the background?
Yeah, the Benny
Hill,
yeah.
I always forget which one's the televangelist and which one's the British comic.
So it's hard to know, yeah. They both look alike, don't they?
Yeah. And, another thing about you, Chris, I don't mean to categorize you too specifically anywhere, but you come from somewhere on the left side of the political spectrum, and yet you hardly ever, I think, in your writings use the term democracy. You always talk about the end of our republic, which is the kind of language that people don't use very often. And I wonder if you can explain why it is that you choose those words.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if there's any sort of big philosophy behind it. Our nation is a republic, and that's just what we talk about. Democracy is of course, obviously we're not a democracy. We're not, we don't all vote on everything, and we don't choose our leaders for war by lot or anything like that, but, which we probably should. We probably should be better off. But I just speak about what we're talking about. We're a constitutional republic. We're supposed to be, and so that's usually the language that I've heard. Democracy is a more general term, and also it's in this day and age, it's a completely degraded term. And what does democracy mean? By the time the Bush people got used to using for democracy, what democracy means, we kill 1 million people in Iraq and we let Shiite militias vote for whoever they want to run. So it's sort of a degraded term. But what I'm usually writing about is something very specific. I'm usually writing about, specific crimes against the Constitution, specific actions taken that are gutting the Constitution of our republic. And so,
the setting of the rule of law, the basis for all this.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell me your impression of Barack Obama? He seems like the last hope for a lot of anti-war activists.
Well, I wrote a piece on that a few weeks ago. Well, it's just hard to say. I just don't think I don't see Barack Obama as the great hope against the war, or more importantly, against the whole imperial system. This whole system that is dependent on continual war and perpetual war. Where does he speak against this system? Where does he say, we've got 800 bases all across the world. We better bring those boys home. Why do we have bases here? Why do we have bases in Kazakhstan? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? I don't see him saying anything like that. I don't see him questioning this sort of imperialist, corporate, war machine state that we have, which is now with an economy and a system that's built on war profit. Where does he speak against that? His plan about so-called ending the war in Iraq is just like Hillary's plan, and it's not much different from John McCain and George Bush's plan. Is that, we'll pull out our combat troops, but we got to leave enough troops in there to train the Iraqis and guard those troops or train the Iraqis and to conduct counterterrorism operations. Well, since they call all the insurgents in Iraq terrorists, this means there's thousands of terrorists. They're going to have to retain 20, 40, 50, 60,000 troops to do counterterrorism actions. They're going to guard the embassy. All these things like that. We're going to help stabilize the region. We've got to have some troops over there to help stabilize the region. What's he talking about? We've got 130,000 troops over there now. In 18 months, if Obama's the president, we'll have 90,000 troops, 60,000 troops. We'll still have an occupying army over there that's exacerbating all the problems. It'll be the same problems that we've had over there. I'm just talking about the plans that he stated. Now he gets in office, maybe he'll be different. Maybe he will somehow be struck down on the road to Damascus and have a conversion and suddenly be anti-war and anti-empire. I doubt it very seriously, but I mean, anything's possible. But according to his plans now, first of all, I don't see any critique of our imperial system. I don't see any critique of our war profiteering, militarist, imperial system. I don't see anything in his plan to end the Iraq war that will actually end the Iraq war.
He seems kind of naive, too. I remember Dennis Kucinich teaching him that according to the IAEA and even according to our own CIA, that there was no evidence of any nuclear weapons production of any kind in Iran live on TV during a debate when he said nobody questions.
That's another aspect of his foreign policy and where how much hope we can put into it is he's been very bellicose about Iran. And he's just he's lockstep with Hillary on Iran, as far as I can tell. And we take no option off the table, and we're there to we're there to do whatever we need to do, and blah blah blah. And I don't see him. Now he might not launch an attack on Iran. Now there might be some difference. I mean, there might be some difference if somebody gets in there. I think Bush and Cheney will launch an attack on Iran, or they certainly want to. And I don't think that if Obama got in there, he would launch an attack on Iran. I don't think he would. But that's a little bit of a difference now. But if an attack comes before then, what's he going to do? He's going to stand up and salute the commander-in-chief, when our brave boys are in the air over enemy territory. I'm like anybody else. I'd love to have hope. I'd love to have hope in somebody. I'd love to think about it. But I just don't. And I'm looking for it. I'm not trying to. Just badmouth everything that comes across. But I just don't see it. All I can go by is what I see and what he says and the policies that he takes and the people he surrounds himself with. Samantha Power, who is the big liberal interventionist. Her whole thing was that we don't do enough. We haven't done enough invading countries, for their own good.
Yeah.
And who is his other big advisor? The big new Brzezinski, who sort of gave us this whole modern world with his sucker trap that he did for the Soviet. He's the one who started funding the international Islamic Jihad, in Afghanistan in order to bait the Soviets into invading. As you know,
the Ark of Crisis.
Carter and Brzezinski started supplying these radical, violent extremists, Islamic extremists in Afghanistan before the Soviet Union invaded. They did it in order to help draw the Soviet Union into this invasion. So, that's so much for Charlie Wilson's war. Charlie Wilson's war was our war. We started with these guys. But so I don't see this is who Obama has surrounded, and he's chosen these people. It's not like he's a pawn of worm tongue from Lord of the Rings or something. And he chose these people because they reflect his values and what he sees, that what he wants to do. So
maybe Admiral Fallon would be a good fit for vice president now that he's retired.
Well, that would be a clever sort of masterstroke. Because there's two things going on. There's two things going on. There's always two ways you can look at it, and I'm just like anyone else. I like to do the political, insider baseball stuff too. I like to follow that, and part of that, and that's part of where we talk about how Fallon is, he's getting up Bush's crawl, and that's good, and there's some little political going on there. There's that aspect of politics, and I follow that too. But one thing that I think is always bad is that this is as far as it goes for almost 95% of our media. That we just follow the horse race, the insider baseball, who's up, who's down. What would be a cool thing to do with this, and that's, I'm also interested in that. That's fine. But there's this whole other aspect about what it actually means in human terms. And, and I think this is what, as you mentioned before, this is what is completely forgotten. So while we're over here talking about Fallon and Bush and Cheney and, who's up and who's down and what if, on the other side, there's those three women and those three children blown to bits by a missile fired by Fallon, you see. So, and it's just hard to go back and forth. And I think it's even worse now because during the election year, you see so many of these so-called dissident blogs or progressive blogs. That other element, that moral element, that human element, that even spiritual element, the element of human beings being killed and churned into nothingness, for the imperial domination of a small elite, that goes away, and all we hear is the horse race stuff. It's all about this, that, and the other. So
yeah, it's really sad too that if there's any legitimate basis for American exceptionalism, it is that we have as our creed that everybody's born free with natural rights and natural dignity because they're a human being. And yet, our exceptionalism is our excuse for treating everyone else in the world as though they are not individuals.
Well, no, I mean it's a a stupid and tragic thing, and I think it's just a common human thing, because like you say, reading that book, the Romans thought they were completely exceptional too, and that was their same excuse for treating people like that, was that, well, we are the bearers of civilization, and we come into this place, and if we have to kill 20,000 of these Gauls in order to civilize them, that's what we'll do, and then the rest of from generations on, they'll be civilized, and so that was their excuse too. I mean, they're exceptional. The gods are on our side, or as later on when they suddenly became Christian, was imposed by an emperor, then God is on our side, and it's just everyone. The British Empire was the same thing. Everyone thinks that everyone's exceptional, but as you say, what is sort of bitterly ironic is that Americans' exceptionalism, any idea that we could be exceptional is based on the idea of freedom and liberty and leaving people alone. But and that's precisely what we don't do. Yeah.
It's sort of like, well, they hate us because we're free, so we'll just scrap the Bill of Rights, and that ought to call them off.
Yeah, right. Well, maybe it's the long-term strategy. Maybe that's what it is. Bush has made himself a dictator simply just to, get up on Osama bin Laden's nose or something. Maybe that's what it is, yeah.
All right, everybody. That's Chris Floyd. He's the author of the blog and the book Empire Burlesque, High Crimes and Low Comedy in the Bush Imperium. Thanks again for joining us on Anti-War Radio, Chris.
No, thank you.